The fight for religious freedom.
Government policies and regulations have infringed on the free exercise of religion.
A look back at my one-on-one interview with Vice President Mike Pence. The summit and the faithful. The ambassador for international religious freedom on his commitment to promote it around the world. A win at the Supreme Court for a man who wouldn't make a cake for a same-sex couple. We have analysis. And God bless America at 100. On a special edition of EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, July 4th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We begin this special edition tonight with my one-on-one interview with the Vice President of the United States. In May, Mike Pence told me about the development of new policies and laws reflecting religious freedom, plus his reaction to criticism he received at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Mr. Vice President, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Lauren. Great to have you here on the National Day of Prayer.
It is great to be here. Part of the initiative that the President signed into executive order today said that it wants to reduce burdens of the exercise of free religion.
Right.
Doesn't our Constitution already protect freedom of religion?
It absolutely does. In the very First Amendment of the Constitution, it protects the free exercise thereof. But as you know, Lauren, for many years, government policies and regulations have infringed on the free exercise of religion in the advancement of other policies. We think of the Little Sisters of the Poor, the action the President took last year to make sure that this administration would end any effort to restrict the freedom of religion or conscience of any organization in the country. But this year what the President did was really take that process of developing policy and bring it right into the center of the White House.
The President has been very vocal about U.S. religious freedom. When talking about the freedom of religion for those around the world, where does that rank in the priorities for the White House?
It's an enormously high priority. You need look no further than the Oval Office this last Monday when the President welcomed the President of Nigeria, and they're called out to the President. Our desire to work closely with them to end the burning of churches and the murder of Christians that's taken place at the hands of terrorists in that country. The President took decisive action following on great work that you did on this network to make sure that now over $100 million in U.S. aid is going directly to religious-based Christian organizations in the Nineveh Plain. We're helping now to rebuild Christian communities and religious minorities in ways that just wasn't happening under the UN program. But I can tell you during my travels through the Middle East, my travels across the world, that America's commitment to religious freedom, to standing with people of faith that are facing persecution, whatever their faith background, is at the center of our policy.
Let's switch to abortion. This administration says and describes itself as one of the foremost defenders of the sanctity of life in the history of the White House. The President did sign the omnibus bill that funds Planned Parenthood, continues to fund it. The campaign promised to defund Planned Parenthood. Where are we on that? What can we say to those who are pro-life, who are looking to this administration to defund Planned Parenthood?
Well, Lauren, as you know, I'm pro-life and I don't apologize for it. And I just couldn't be more proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with the most pro-life president in my lifetime. This is a president who reaffirmed the Mexico City policy, restricting the use of U.S. tax dollars in foreign aid to support abortion overseas. He actually expanded that policy. He's been appointing conservatives to the courts from the highest court on down all across this land. He's taken decisive steps to affirm our commitment to the sanctity of life. And all I can tell you is that we're continuing to look at policies and practices to make sure that not only are we protecting the unborn, but that we're protecting taxpayers who cherish the sanctity of life. And we'll continue to work earnestly on those issues in the days ahead.
On immigration, the Catholic bishops have spoken up vociferously about the rights of those who are trying to come to the United States, who are being persecuted in their countries. The numbers of refugees coming in are the lowest that we have seen them in recent years. How do you balance the right of countries to protect their borders and to help those less fortunate?
I think the balance all begins with the rule of law, Lauren. The President has said a nation without borders is not a nation. And we're absolutely determined to build a wall, to reform our border security, to give our Border Patrol agents the resources that they need, and reform our immigration laws that too often serve as a magnet for vulnerable people to be exploited by drug cartels or human traffickers who will give them the hope of coming either legally or illegal into this country, and vulnerable families then travel thousands of miles at great risk to do that. We really believe that by reaffirming our commitment to border security, by reforming our laws to end that magnet that seems to entice vulnerable populations, then we'll be able to do what the American people have done throughout our history and do to this day, and that is that open our arms to people that are seeking asylum, open our arms to refugees, but to do it under the law. That's the President's commitment, and we believe it's what the American people want to see.
Before we go, a comedian on Saturday mocked your belief that abortion is murder. How do you feel about that?
Well, I stand without apology for the sanctity of life, and have worked throughout my career to advance that principle in the public square. But anytime I'm criticized for standing for what we believe, I count it all joy, as the good book says.
Mr. Vice President, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Lauren. Good to be with you.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the United States is committed to promoting religious freedom around the world. North Korea, Myanmar, and Saudi Arabia are among 200 countries profiled in an annual report by the State Department. The man leading the fight for religious freedom is Sam Brownback. Sam Brownback is the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom. He's the first Catholic to fill the role. Welcome back to the program, sir.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you.
You released a report today, and the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom also has its own report ranking North Korea as the top of the list of the worst offenders. And while the U.S. is negotiating with North Korea, even though they released 3 prisoners, there are hundreds of thousands, up to 120,000 people in labor camps there. So how important is the religious freedom issue going to be in talks with North Korea?
I think it's going to be critical and foundational. And now you're seeing the first actions that the North Koreans are taking in response to the U.S. pressure is releasing a couple of the prisoners, 3 prisoners. I raised the issues of North Korea 15 years ago when I was in the Senate, and I couldn't get anybody to act. And now you're seeing this administration act and put pressure on North Korea and this gulag system that they have. It's a terrible situation for way too many people there, and it's hardest particularly on the Christians in North Korea.
Right, where, you're not even allowed to have Bibles or practice in church. Secretary Pompeo announced this morning that the U.S. is going to host a ministerial meeting to focus on advancing religious freedom. And he said it will be focused on action. Are you going to invite North Korea, Saudi Arabia, other offenders of religious freedom, or is it just going to be like-minded countries?
Well, there'll be 2 groups that will be targeted for the ministerial. One is going to be like-minded countries, because we want to build an alliance, a coalition of the like-minded to push forward religious freedom around the world. And there are a number of countries that will do that. It will also have countries in here that are moving forward on religious freedom, that they've got not a very good track record on it, but they're willing to work on it, and they're showing actual positive steps moving forward. So we're not releasing a list of who all is going to be invited, but those are the categories of the countries that we look forward to working with. And I think this thing is really going to ignite this issue globally, where you've got over 70% of the people of the world live in countries with substantial religious freedom restrictions. We're hopeful of really changing that number.
The Secretary also noted that the situation in Myanmar, where you visited last month, saying that the violence against the Muslim Rohingya minority was the worst. Christians in Kachin in northern Myanmar are also impacted. How will this ministerial meeting actually physically help them?
Well, hopefully it's going to bring global action to bear on Burma, what they're doing. That's ethnic cleansing of a religious minority, at least, and probably far worse when its final determination is made. But we need to work in concert with the global community. And here, too, the Chinese need to start stepping up. They've let this situation take place along their border with a neighbor and have not done much. Now, recently they started to speak up a little bit on the Kachin. But this is a situation where we need a global response to this horrific situation that's taking place at the hands of the government, and a long-standing effort by this government in Myanmar, the military leadership in particular, to push out these ethnic religious minorities.
You know, one of the challenges, not just there, but for Christians in Iraq, has been receiving the aid that has been earmarked for them. What is the status of the money for the Christians? How long after this summit would it take to get money to Rohingyas and Christians there?
Well, it has been a difficulty in northern Iraq and that Nineveh Plains region. The Vice President made a big announcement on this earlier. That money has been reprogrammed into the minority religious areas, particularly for the Christians and the Yazidis in Iraq. There have been, conferences about how to get it to the operators for as far as the nonprofit groups, the faith communities in those areas. But this has been an adjustment, and it's taken time to get it going. I'm starting to hear about some of the early opportunities that are starting to hear about these funds, but it's just not really fully moved yet. And it needs to move and get going.
Well, we'll be asking you about it.
You're trying to make the government move in a different direction. Yeah. Keep doing it.
Okay, we will. Sam Brownback, the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, thank you so much for coming on the program.
My pleasure, and I hope your audience prays for all the people that are being persecuted.
Absolutely. Thank you. Coming up, a win for religious freedom at the Supreme Court. Analysis on the case of Jack Phillips, a Colorado baker. Plus, 100 years of God Bless America. Welcome back to this special edition of EWTN News Nightly. I'm Lauren Ashburn. In June, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of a Colorado baker who wouldn't make a wedding cake for a same-sex couple because of his religious beliefs. The justice's decision ruled the Colorado Civil Rights Commission used anti-religious bias when it ruled against baker Jack Phillips. The High Court's justices voted 7-2 that the commission violated Phillips' rights under the First Amendment. The U.S. bishops are praising the ruling in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. The USCCB writes in part, "True tolerance allows people with different viewpoints to be free to live out their beliefs, even if those beliefs are unpopular with the government." On the day of the ruling, correspondent White Goolsbee spoke to Ryan Anderson from the Heritage Foundation to break down what the decision means for religious freedom.
Joining me now to take a closer look at today's Supreme Court decision is Ryan Anderson, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Ryan, welcome back to the program. Today's ruling appears to be a victory for religious liberty, but it's also what's called a limited ruling. What does that mean, and how does that impact the larger fight for religious freedom in our country?
Sure. Well, today's victory is a big win for all Americans, including all Americans who believe that marriage is the union of a husband and wife. The Supreme Court said in a 7-2 ruling that the state of Colorado had shown undue hostility towards Jack Phillips and his religious beliefs by not even considering that they would deserve First Amendment protection. And so the court ruled 7-2, protecting Jack Phillips and his right to be able to run his business in accordance with his belief that marriage unite husband and wife. Now, of course, we'll have to see how this applies to other cases. As you mentioned, the critics are saying that it's a limited ruling, but for today, it's a big win, and it's a 7-2 win.
I want to have you respond to the critics, because a lot of them say that bakers like Jack Phillips are discriminating against same-sex couples. What's your response to that?
He's not discriminating at all, and this is something that Justice Gorsuch really pulls out very nicely in his concurring opinion. He says the baker, Jack Phillips, doesn't even take into consideration the identity of his customers. He won't bake a cake celebrating a same-sex wedding, regardless of who asks him to bake that cake. It doesn't matter the identity of the people, it matters his identity and what sort of speech he can speak, what sort of celebrations he can celebrate. It's about him, it's not about the customer. And Gorsuch pulls this out by showing that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission agreed with that line of thinking in 3 other cases. There were 3 bakers who refused to do anti-gay cakes, and the commission said that's not discrimination. But when Jack Phillips says he can't do a pro-gay marriage cake, that all of a sudden is discrimination. And so the Supreme Court today, 7-2, said that's a double standard, and that the state of Colorado can't apply a double standard simply to denigrate and demean and stigmatize Jack Phillips.
Such an interesting case, and one that we'll, like I said, we'll continue to follow to figure out how this applies to other cases and what the implications are. Ryan Anderson, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you.
Up next, God Bless America at 100, a look at the history behind the popular patriotic piece. And an interview with the tenor who sang it in front of hundreds at this year's National Catholic Prayer Breakfast. Welcome back. I'm Lauren Ashburn. On this 4th of July, we focus now on a song of faith and patriotism. It turns 100 this year and has touched the hearts of Americans for generations. Correspondent Jason Calvi takes us on a historical tour of God Bless America.
Irving Berlin, a Jewish immigrant who fled persecution in Russia, wrote this song during the storm clouds of World War I. But it didn't see the light of day for 20 years. Singer Kate Smith premiered it on the radio. Music scholar Cheryl Kaskowitz literally wrote the book on the song.
When it was performed on Armistice Day in the fall of 1938, it actually had a message to stay out of the war. It included a line that was, let us all be thankful that we're far from there.
By 1939, as Nazi horrors shocked the world, Berlin changed that line to, let us be grateful for a land so fair. After the Second World War, Kaskowitz says the song promoted tolerance. God Bless America struck a chord with 1960s civil rights activists, as well as supporters of the Vietnam War. And the song brought healing after September 11. The famous American composer never made a dime from this song. He donated his royalties to the Boy and Girl Scouts of America.
Irving Berlin's music has played such an important role in American history that it's no wonder right here at the National Museum of American History, tucked in with items like a chalice from World War II as well as a nurse's uniform, you can check out his very own piano, the composer of other American hits like White Christmas. He died in New York City at the age of 101, 29 years ago. But his music doesn't just live on in the history books, it also lives on in the hearts of Americans.
St. Augustine said, "He who sings prays twice." So this year's National Catholic Prayer Breakfast got off to a very prayerful start.
God bless America.
The song was performed by Luciano Lamonarca, an Italian opera singer. After he sang to the crowd, he joined us on EWTN's set. Well, you did just an amazing job. I had goosebumps as you were singing.
Thank you.
Tell me about your history with the Catholic Church, Luciano Lamonarca.
Yes. Well, I was born in Italy. I came from the region of Puglia, the region where Padre Pio comes from. And you are raised Catholic. My mother was bringing me to the sanctuary every year, like any other family. You can find mostly in each house you find a picture of Padre Pio probably. And then you raise Catholic, and then go on. But my deep faith actually became stronger when I came here in the United States of America.
You are not only a singer, but you are so involved in the community and spreading the worldview. The founder of the Padre Pio Foundation, and he was an Italian priest with a stigmata, which is the marks that correspond to the wounds of Jesus' crucifixion. And he was declared a saint in 2000. Your personal connection drove you to begin that foundation.
Yes, indeed. Padre Pio, it's a beloved saint, probably one of the most known in the contemporary world. And as I had the devotion and came from his country in 2014, I founded the St. Pio Foundation, most known now because we are bringing a tour of the relics of Padre Pio on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of his death around the country, Mexico and Canada. The connection with me was much deeper than that. My wife and I were declared after a very big or bad miscarriage that we would have not had children. So there started the process for us going back and forward to the sanctuary to pray for Padre Pio intercession. We met a friend of Padre Pio who actually announced what we were going to face, but that eventually we were going to become a parent. And now Valentina, my wife, and I are proudly parents of Sebastian, and we are hoping for a second intercession for Padre Pio.
Will you have a son or daughter, Pia for a daughter or Pio for a boy?
Surely we will highly consider it. We know that Padre Pio is deeply in our heart, and that's why as soon as I founded the foundation, the blessing came.
You are known as the goodwill tenor because of all the charitable work you do,
indeed.
And not just with the Padre Pio Foundation. Tell us about Zambia and what you're doing in the country of Zambia.
I launched a CD, Mamma, dedicated to my mother who passed away for cancer in 2005. And we were approached by a Salesian nun who brought us to this City of Hope project. So as I was launching my CD on Lincoln Center, I thought to raise funds and to start this project or to support this project. And then after that, living in New York, every day was a challenge. Every day was asking to be supported, whatever a charity, whatever singing. So I decided in 2010 to dedicate at least 30 to 40% of my performances to charity. It means that I don't require usually fees in order to try to foster and support the good charity. That's why the Goodwill nickname came. Of course, there are a few cases that are very important to me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Your rendition of God Bless America was absolutely wonderful. Luciano La Monarca.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We thank you for joining us tonight for this special edition of EWTN News Nightly. We hope you have a safe and happy 4th of July. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.